Chapter 10. After Romeo's little appearance, I've requested that Benat keep a few more men on duty tonight, Mateo said when they returned. He fought back a yawn. Precautionary. I doubt Romeo plans to follow or act, but one never knows. They were back at the house, a strange silence between them in the aftermath of the unexpected encounter. Vittoria stood in the middle of the room, uncertain of what to do next. Thank you. I appreciate the caution. He waved it off. Her mind spun back to the events of the day. It was hardly noon, but she already felt tired. Meeting Romeo had been disorienting, but it was the arena that frightened her. The generations of spilled blood, death in the air. It was a dark place where men went to die. I promised to explain more of our plan. Allow me to do so now. She nodded. Mateo straightened. Fatigue undercut his movements, which seemed heavy and slow. For now, my plan is to continue what we have been doing. You will remain out there distributing food buckets, while we support the needs of the workers as best we can. Benat, his men, and I will continue our work as La Salvatore. But why? She asked, finally able to voice the question that had haunted her for months. Why do this at all? For one, it helps workers feel safer with us and know we're on their side. You're one of them, and they recognize that. Secondly, they need another figure who is a landowner, but isn't La Salvatore. I will never reveal that I was La Salvatore, because it would threaten what little trust the landowners have in my name. So someone else must arise. And the workers love you already. Many of them have known you for months. Now, we'll take you to different parts of the network where they don't know you yet. Eventually, I want all of the Eastern network to know of you. Then, I want you and La Salvatore to be seen together. She blinked. There was more strategy behind the plan than she'd expected. Part of her had thought he gave the food buckets out of guilt or a sense of obligated reparation, maybe just to build up loyalty to her, so that when she was announced to his betrothed, the workers subsequently trusted him more. But no, he was downright tactical. That's fairly simple. For half a breath, there was hesitation in his face, a sense of something he wasn't saying, but a weary smile swept that away. Simple plans often work. I will just continue to do what I've been doing, and you will fight out the law of rights? He nodded. Essentially. Relief followed her surprise. Knowing the nature of his plan made this all seem less overwhelming. The ability to help workers made the separation from her family bearable. She felt surrounded by luxury in this new world, and the guilt nagged at her. She did no work, yet she and her family ate. They lived in a safe place, too. It didn't seem fair to have so much. Distributing to the workers, however, felt like it balanced her stroke of good luck. The plan gave her firm footing, action, something to do. It would occupy a few hours during the day, at least, and help her make a difference. She drew in a deep breath and nodded, relief apparent in her voice. Thank you, Mateo. I'm grateful that I can still help. He smiled. Always. If you ever need anything, just let me know. I'll be sleeping in the room down the hall if I'm not outside. Knock any time. Also, if you're agreeable, I think it would be beneficial if you learned how to read. Zori has volunteered to teach you in the mornings when she brings the food for the buckets. Magic, too, if you'll have it. Are you interested? She considered the parchments outside her room, stacked on a shelf in the wall. She loved the idea of seeing her name written out, as if understanding the letters made it her own somehow. Mare had admonished her to take her magic learning opportunities where she could. Although magic made her uncomfortable, it could make her safer also. Of course I'm interested, but how is all of these possible? The food buckets, the tutor, the house. Mare. She blinked. Your mare? But I thought... Mateo grinned wryly. Yes, she is dead. Died when I was 14. But she was a great collector of expensive things. It's easy to spend the currency of a high priest, isn't it? A flash of amusement in his voice hid something else. Pain, perhaps? She constantly traded with the Southern Network. They took our goats, green vegetables, and seashells, while she took their gems and silk. When she died, my friends and I hid her wealth away so it didn't fall back to Hodei. He tilted his head to gaze on the room, then lifted both hands. It pays for this, for all the food you've distributed. There are landowners in the farms who don't want Romeo to take the throne, so I formed friendships and agreements with them. I sell mare's stash and buy food from the willing farmers. Zori prepares the food after it arrives, and I use magic to transport it to the bucket." Vittoria laughed. "Very sneaky. I would never have guessed so much is involved." His smile widened. "Sometimes we must be sneaky. The supply won't last forever, of course. For now, it's sufficient." "For now" echoed in the room. It didn't need to last forever, did it? He'd either die or become high priest. The thought made her sick to her stomach again. "Since we are speaking of business matters," he continued with a deep breath, "we are betrothed and will, given my success in the arena, eventually be handfasted. You are in total control of all aspects of that. You will never be forced into anything, which includes the intimate aspects of our relationship. I only ask that we hold off on the handfasting until the law of rights is settled." His expression was inscrutable until she gave a small nod indicating she understood. Her knees spasmed at the thought. At least he'd answered her unasked question, and there was a sense of relief in knowing she wouldn't be a widow. They felt like strangers all of a sudden, cordial but distant. She hated it, but welcomed it at the same time. He gave her power, which so few workers gave to their wives. "Thank you." Mateo straightened. "I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, Vittoria." "And if you die in 4 days?" One of his hands rested on the doorknob. "Benat will get you out of here, and his men will help your family. There are many witches outside Necce who are loyal to me. They have already agreed to take you in your family. Some places in the central network will take you in as a refugee, if it becomes necessary." Of course he'd thought this out already, but who thought of him? No one, it seemed. For being the high priest's son and a man of considerable stature, he was arguably the most solitary figure she'd ever known. No one to truly support him. No one to stand by him, save Benat and his men. It broke her heart, for Mateo was good. Confusing, but genuine. The words she spoke next took her by surprise. "I will always be at your side, Mateo. I see the sacrifice you are making for your network. You don't do it alone anymore." He reached up, touched her face, and gave a small smile that spoke worlds. "Thank you, Mazuna. I can't tell you how much that means. Tonight, after some rest, I will take you to your family. You may see them as much as you wish. Until you can learn to transport yourself, you need only ask." With a slight bow, he faded into the hallway. Vittoria watched the space where he disappeared, her heart hiccuping. Sunlight tangled with Vittoria's dreams when she awoke 4 days later. A gentle breeze rushed across her skin as she opened her eyes. The gauzy curtains drifted into the rooms, reaching for her, and the bed creaked as it rocked. She drew in a deep breath of salty air, stretched her arms above her head with a little squeak, and let her eyes flutter closed again. 5 days of this elegant lifestyle, and she still couldn't blink herself out of her stupor, her half-belief that this was all a dream. If this weren't destined to be such a bloody day, she'd almost call it lovely. Hints of fresh-baked pita stirred her awake. Zuri must be here already. Vittoria threw her covers off and slipped into the balmy air to help Zuri finish the food preparations. Time for a trip into Necce, then. Not to mention the desperate fact that she needed a distraction from the impending test of courage. "Midday," Mateo had said last night. He'd stared at the fire until she'd slipped away to go to bed. "We'll meet at the arena just before midday. The spectating landowners will already be there. You and Benat will follow separately. He'll keep you safe." 5 hours, she thought with a quick glance at the sun and the sky. She slipped into the subtlest dress she could find, and a knock sounded at the door. "Come in, Zuri," she called, eager to see her new friend. Life in the covens hadn't given her time to make friends, but now, Zuri's maternal warmth had been a safe spot in the midst of all the new things. Even though Vittoria saw her family every night before Nika went to bed, she desperately needed Zuri's motherly touch here. Zuri had already started teaching Vittoria the basics of the alphabet and how to spell her name. They practiced simple magic every day in the sunshine. Zuri opened the door and cocked a hip. "Well, you ready to go?" "Just about." Vittoria reached into a basket next to her door and extracted an elaborate candlestick that, she felt some certainty, was made of pure silver. "Where did you get that?" Zuri asked. "One of Benat's men brought it to me last night," she said as she flipped it over. "It was discarded from the castle because there's a slight imperfection at the bottom. Can you believe that? A silver candlestick cast away for one little mark." There are all kinds of sick in the head up there. Zuri folded her arms and pursed her lips. Are you ready for the test of courage today? Vittoria wrapped the candlestick in a pillowcase and avoided Zuri's studious gaze. The tone of her voice suggested she wouldn't tolerate Vittoria avoiding the conversation. Not in the slightest. He's going to be okay, Zuri said. Mateo has always been a survivor. He will be one today also. Vittoria nodded. I trust him. She felt a rush of fear. She and Mateo were friends now that they'd spent the last 5 days living in the same house. Distributing food buckets meant more now that she knew the person tailing her, and that all this work meant something. We're so close, she wanted to shout to all the workers. Mateo will bring us peace. Just hold on a little longer. But all the what-ifs ran through her head so quickly they made her dizzy. Her hair rustled as she tied it away from her face in a braid that no landowner's wife would be caught dead with. Did he leave already? This morning, Zuri nodded. I think he went back to his estate to find some peace. He has gone there before. Why there? It's where he last saw his mare. No one else has inhabited it. They say ghosts live there. Zuri shrugged. Vittoria's lips rounded into an O. She did the same thing when she missed Anton. Searched for ghosts of the past for comfort. Only she turned to a Nico, wrapped her arms around his warm little body, and remembered Anton's bright personality and infectious laugh. Mateo had none of that to snuggle up to. Zuri bustled up behind her to pluck a string off her shoulder, then nodded. She tilted her head toward the door. Well, let's get going. Benat is waiting for you, I'm sure. Don't worry about Mateo, Masuna. He'll be fine. Vittoria followed Zuri out of the room with the fervent hope that she was right. Do you have any family, Benat? No, lady, just me. Benat stood with Vittoria in an alley not far from the Elixir of the Giver la Principessa. It was her favorite spot. Crowds gathered here daily now, waiting for her to appear. The stench of urine and dirt filled her nostrils. Despite the rank smell, there was an odd sort of comfort in the familiarity of it. Witches bustled around, clutching bags or baskets, or poorly attempting to hide half-full pockets of food. How did you meet Mateo? Luck. She thought of asking what that meant, but didn't. If he wanted her to know, he'd tell her. His rough features softened. Scars peppered his neck and face, some edging along his hairline, others deepening his scowl. He thrust a white cloak at her. Intricately embroidered magnolia flowers covered the back of the cape in a wreath design. The creamy silk material would make her stand out from a coven away. The top of the cape, near her neck, boasted a gentle blush of color, as if a magnolia petal were unfolding on her back. Here, Mateo wanted you to wear this. White? You must be kidding. It will be filthy in a moment's time. He shrugged and motioned her forward. She twirled the cloak on with a sigh, then stepped out of the alley and emerged into downtown Necce with a bucket in hand. The cape billowed at her back as she hurried down the street. Newsbook hawkers and flower girls called out over the din of clopping horseshoes. The air of the alley smelled thick with brine and fresh fish. She approached a huddled figure on the dirt near a pile of discarded fish guts. The half-sleeping figure stirred when Vittoria pressed a pita into his claw-like hand. May la Principessa bless you, she murmured, as she always did. Mateo's voice rang in the back of her mind. La Principessa is the most powerful of all givers, he told her several nights ago. What is more powerful than hope? Whether you believe in her or not, invoke her name when you give them food. Remind them they have reason to hope. We make sure of that every day. The man, ragged beard crusted with filth, blinked rapidly. She smiled, then moved down the alley toward a blacksmith shop. There, a man stood behind an anvil, near a fire where a young boy shoveled coal. Heat thickened the air. The man regarded her cloak, then Benat. Children sprinted by, singing, La Emanuela will avenge us. Hello, the blacksmith said. Can you split silver? He nodded. She extracted the elaborate candlestick. I'd like this to be split into chunks, maybe the size of the end of my thumb. As many as you can. I'll happily give you 1 or 2 for your time. Her gaze darted to a book behind the desk. No notation of work necessary. You won't have to share it with your landowner. When she pushed it toward him, he stepped back. No. Her brow furrowed. Why not? It's a test. Oh, no. I can understand your fear, but it's not a test. He shot a dubious glance at her cloak. She glared at Benat as if to prove her point, but he just shrugged again. You stole it, the blacksmith said. They'll blame me. I didn't. It was given to me, and I don't need it. I want to distribute the silver to witches. You, your assistant, your family, you may all have one. His suspicion turned to incredulity in seconds. Then you're a fool. He put a hand on his forehead. Touched with the mind fever, why would you give away silver? She laughed, then shrugged. I'm a lavanda maid. His gaze tapered. You're that witch, aren't you? The one who gives away food. The one who... He eyed Benat again. Some of his apprehension faded. She brightened. Yes. He frowned, then made a sound in his throat while he glanced over the candlestick. She held his gaze, not daring to breathe. The boy behind the blacksmith paused, a shovel of coal held halfway to the fire. The blacksmith looked from Vittoria to the candlestick and back again. Père, the boy whispered, please. 3 pieces for you. Make them as large as you want. With a reluctant sigh, the blacksmith held out a sooty hand and flicked his fingers once. Quickly, before my landowner comes. 20 minutes later, Vittoria slipped out of the smithy, 40 fingernail-sized silver chunks clinking softly in her pocket. She'd given a pita bread to the blacksmith and the boy, then stopped in front of an alley, near a man with the leg cut off at the knee. Hello, here, a piece of silver. La Principessa watches over you, Mateo. The shriveled man looked at her through one eye, the other sealed shut and crusted over. The eyelashes merged into one thick line as he curled his fingers around the silver. Do you have somewhere to sleep? He gestured to the ground. Then I shall bring a blanket next time. She put a hand on top of his. Perhaps 2 of them. Whispers followed her as she advanced farther into Necce, distributing the silver pieces to children and adults. Witches crowded around them as she proceeded down an alley. Under his breath, Benat said, We must return, lady. You are drawing a crowd again. It's not the first time, Benat. It is for a crowd of this size. You have drawn more attention than usual with your silver. She cast a quick glance behind her. Her stomach caught. Indeed, quite a few witches followed them now. No more than 20, but enough to draw the curious gazes of other workers. They seemed more curious than threatening. For now. We're giving away silver, she murmured, then tossed a few pieces of silver to the witches. They scrambled after them. Of course we'll draw a crowd. I'll be quick about the rest. Just 20 left. Benat pressed his lips together and followed her quickening steps. For the next 20 minutes, Vittoria approached any beggar with an apparent and desperate need for help. The whispering crowd continued to grow. The bucket disappeared when she handed out the last piece of food. She spoke with each worker she passed, attempting to learn more about their story. Lady, Benat said, Mateo will face his first test soon. We must go. 3 pieces of silver left. There's a woman who begs on the next corner. She's a friend of mine. I'll give them to her. It's this way. She grabbed his arm to move away from the crowded marketplace and nearly ran into 2 young men. One of them startled. His gaze dropped to her cloak and the silver in her hand. He cried, La Principessa, so it's true. The other gaped, A giver is here in the flesh. What? She whispered. Benat pulled her back and stood between them with a scowl. The first witch turned and called to someone behind him. La Principessa, she is here. Find your mare. La Principessa will heal her. Cries rang out from the stalls where workers bought and sold for their landowners. The flood of witches who had been following converged with a surge of curious onlookers from the market. Benat shoved several more witches back, but couldn't keep them at bay. Lady, transport us, Benat. Before he could touch her, 2 workers gripped her arm from behind. Their hands groped her clothing. Something tore. Shouts filled her ears, disorienting her. She whirled around as a cool brush of air fluttered against the back of her arm where her sleeve had once been. With a gasp, she tried to duck away. A wall of witches filled the alley now, blocking all exits. I have the sleeve of La Principessa, a voice shrieked. It will heal all of us. Touch it and you shall see. Vittoria turned. No, please, I am not La Principessa. Her words were drowned in the chaos as Benat struggled to stem the tide. He reached for her, shouting her name, but his voice, too, was lost in the din. More witches gathered from the far reaches of the marketplace. Vittoria ducked under their grasping arms in a poor attempt to find her way out of the madness. They tugged her hair, groped for her skirts, which tore. With a bellow and several violent shoves, Benat reached for her again. He held firmly onto her shoulder and pulled her close. Still, the witches pressed toward them. I can't transport us like this. We need to get away. The transportation magic won't work if someone else is touching us." The cacophony reached a crescendo as the two of them struggled against the mob. A break near a corner allowed Vittoria to stumble away. Benat gained the footing he needed, then hauled her into his side and ran. Vittoria struggled to keep up. The remaining pieces of silver scattered on the ground behind her. Cries rang out. "Silver! She cares for all of us." Witches mobbed each other for the silver pieces. 3 of Mateo's men appeared to block the witches from following. A shrill scream arose from the other side of the marketplace. The workers dispersed. "Guardians!" someone shouted. "Run!" Benat skidded to a stop. The odd tingle of a transportation spell washed over her, but the hard clamp of a hand on her arm stopped it. Her heart barely had time to squeeze before she saw an emerald cape. A helmet and a set of half-armor made of metal and leather decorated a broad-shouldered guardian. Her head tilted back to look into a pair of cold, dark eyes. Benat was torn away from her. Then she heard the clink of swords on stone. Screams of pain and flashes of fire in the background meant the guardians had come to the covens, and they had her now. "You're wanted by His Majesty Hodei the High Priest," said a firm voice. "Come with us." "No!" Benat shouted as he lunged. "Lady!" He struggled against 4 guardians who silenced him with a spell. Another incantation dropped him to the ground. Vittoria met his livid gaze seconds before the guardians forced her into the pressure of a transportation spell. Everything went dark.